gamers can use the assets in any manner they see fit in any game, in any meta world that they enter. I want them to be able to express themselves as they see fit, and that's where I got the name Rawrshak.
Watchmen, like the Alan Moore graphic novel, was so influential because it was the first example of these imperfect anti-heroes who were both heroes but also problematic, like the comedian, and like the fact that the old way of doing comics wasn't going to be sustainable into this postmodern world where like good and bad kind of had different connotations. And so in a poetic sense, in a philosophical sense, your project highlights how the old gaming world isn't sustainable in the ways you've talked about, and how you're kind of liberating it in the way that that story liberated the graphic novel format.
You're tuned to the ArCast,
where we talk about the blockchain
on the ArCast,
and how your data remains.
It's the ArCast,
where ArDrive is the topic, censorship-resistant permanence. Yeah, we got it. What's up, everyone? It's Andrew from ArDrive, back with another episode of the ArCast. This is episode 7 with Christian Sumido, who started Rawrshak, which is a way game developers and players can store their assets in a decentralized way. He uses ArDrive, and it's been going well, and he was a really interesting person to talk to. We'd never interviewed anyone in the gaming space before, but it was a really fun interview. So check that out. The NFT shirts have been sent. So if you received one, please post a photo and we will retweet. The new newsletter goes out January 31st. So be sure to sign up. ardrive.io/newsletter. We're having a new public bounty contest on February 1st, so be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that. Shout out, as always, to Arweeb News for retweeting and promoting the ArCast, and shout out to the Permacast Network for hosting these episodes for perpetuity. So let's jump right into it. This is my interview with Christian from Rawrshak. Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the ArCast. I'm here with Christian Sumido. This is our first interview with anyone in the gaming sphere, and I'm super excited to have him on the ArCast. So, Christian, how are you doing today? What's going on?
Hey, man. I'm doing amazing. It's been a rough couple of weeks with our launch, and but everything's going pretty well, so I'm pretty excited to start talking about that.
You've been working on this for a while, and it's exciting to talk to you because we really haven't talked to anyone in the Web3 gamer world, and this thing that you and your team have created, you're doing things that haven't been done. Do you want to just explain the project a little bit to people who may not be familiar with it?
Sure. So Rawrshak is actually a project that I've been working on for the last. I've been thinking about the project for the last year and a half, but I only really started developing the project sometime around April of last year. Rawrshak is a gaming-focused NFT platform that empowers creators to deploy cross-game interoperable assets. The platform provides a decentralized end-to-end solution for traditional game developers who want to easily plug into the metaverse. So the main goal for the project was to offer a framework that allows assets that game developers create, as well as content creators, to propagate into the metaverse without having to manually redeploy these assets onto every single game that they want to deploy on. So the idea is to create a common standard or framework that increases scalability when it comes to deploying NFTs for not only just games, but also any type of asset, really.
On your site, you have an interesting video that has an overview, and you mentioned that there's a high barrier of entry for traditional game developers entering the blockchain space. And I thought it was interesting. How does your project help solve that problem?
Traditional game developers at this point really have a hard time. They have a hard time trying to figure out what it is they want to do in the blockchain space. At this point, there's very little tools and libraries that easily allow game developers to hook into blockchain technology. There's very few wallets that are pluggable into game engines. There's it's a little bit difficult, and if you do want to go and pursue the whole play to earn sphere. You have to go and create your own ecosystem, create the actual economics of the game. And realistically, not all games should implement their own economies. Like, for example, chess or small indie games. It's hard for them to create their own ecosystem of gamers. It's easier to it should be easier for them to just reward their gamers the way they normally would, but those assets are that can exist all over the metaverse, and it's a high barrier because there's just too much to do for them, as well as it's hard to hire game developers by themselves, let alone ones with blockchain experience. So hopefully our project provides all the necessary libraries and tools and frameworks that makes this entire process so much easier.
I love your optimism, and I love the idea that you're kind of liberating this new chapter in Web3 development, because you have made a point on your site that you have trepidation about the big tech giants doing with Web3 what they did with Web 2. And I thought that was interesting because that's a common concern in the crypto world. I know one of the main things that's exciting about Arweave and ArDrive is this idea that having truly decentralized data solves a lot of issues that were brought up with the previous era of the internet. So what do you think about that? Do you feel like there's a chance that big tech will try to take over Web3 gaming? And what are some of the concerns in that?
Without a doubt, big tech is going to enter the space. I mean, I worked at Microsoft and I had a lot of friends at Facebook, and from what I can tell, Microsoft specifically, for example, their main focus is to get all their gamers on their xCloud platform, because realistically, all the games at this point are going to have to make a choice. Either they're going to get their game developers are going to have to be either trying to go about the next couple of years developing games by themselves, or they're going to get acquired by big publishers that have a lot of money to throw at them. So for Microsoft, for example, in their gaming space, they're acquiring these big studios, like the recent Activision purchase, as well as the Bethesda purchase last year. Their goal is to acquire content. And the content is important because that's how they attract the gamers, and that's how they that's how they're gonna retain their inventive state. They're on the defensive. They have a lot of money in the space, and because the open metaverse is trying to build its own thing, they have a lot to lose, essentially. And so not only are they trying to be buying everyone at big content as much as possible, it's going to be a rough battle for the open metaverse. With that said, it's the promise for an open metaverse is significantly better for users and gamers, mainly because they have a lot more freedom with regards to the stuff that they collect. I think that both open metaverse as well as corporate metaverse are going to be a big thing. The only question is, and it's not going to be one or the other. Realistically, most people are going to be part of both ecosystems. The only question is, would you prefer your assets to be somewhat locked behind a walled garden for each universe that you're going to be part of, or just have your assets be usable anywhere you want to go? When
I think about the history of gaming, back to the original games, it's the first example I can think of this participatory media, this interactive multimedia where the gamers become part of the story. There's an emotional connection to it. There's this investment in time in the community. And that's what's special about Web3. I think everything is kind of liberated. And one of the things you've been doing is working to get as many people as you can into the community. And that's what Rawrshak, your project, has been doing well, trying to get the gamers and the game developers. Do you have different strategies with how you try to approach gamers versus game developers, or do you find that the community kind of comes together?
I think that for gamers, they're pretty much tired of all of the stuff that they've collected over the years having have to have dropped them because they're continuously moving on to new games. The promise of being able to take all of the interesting assets that they've collected, they've spent a lot of time collecting. Just that promise is already extremely attractive. From a game developer's perspective, to them, it's a fight for survival at this point. Either they're going to be forced to have their games sit in a walled metaverse, kind of like Xbox's ecosystem. That's not terrible, but the problem is Xbox and Microsoft have majority of the power there. They can charge as high or as low fees or cuts to their to whatever games get sold on there, and there's never a guarantee that those whatever assets that you create on that system, that 100% of that revenue goes to them or goes to the developer. The promise for developers, at least in the open metaverse, is that they have full control over their creations, and that's not guaranteed in the corporate ecosystem. And the more assets they create, because NFTs enable this secondary market, the more assets they create, the revenue for those for the game developers just increase over time. Like since the assets are permanent, those assets never really go out of style.
The profitable model for Microsoft and other legacy gaming companies is the fact that they have these proprietary walled off kind of worlds, right? Where like you're stuck within their quote unquote sandbox in a way. And so this solves some of those issues, right? That's like the hope.
Yeah, definitely. That's the hope. Now, I'm not saying the sandbox is bad because because you're part of a sandbox, you have some guarantees, such as a guaranteed, to some degree, a guaranteed amount of players playing your game. But like all ecosystems, realistically, it's only going to be the top maybe 5%, 2% of that ecosystem that is going to become profitable, and it's essentially a fight between game developers. But Microsoft, being the platform, is just raking in parts of any and all revenues that come in. So for a platform like Microsoft, or even a platform like Meta, it's a brilliant business model. It's not very favorable to game developers overall.
Since it's such an attractive industry, it's kind of easy for people to be taken advantage of, or like the bigger companies might work people like really long hours, and that there's this idea that there's a need for equity and fairness for game developers because, like, as you said earlier, their skills are really needed, but sometimes they're kind of not. I don't know. Do you think it's a common concern that some game developer, like the bigger companies, may take advantage of the fact that they're like the cool big company?
For sure. I worked as a game developer back when I had an internship at EA, and I had an internship at another game studio. And one of the main reasons that I ended up after graduating college, I ended up not pursuing game development as my even though that was my initial goal coming into college, was because game developers don't really get treated as well as other engineers in the space. Kind of like cattle to a certain degree. I don't want to say they're cattle, but like they're kind of treated like to a certain degree. And the model for game developer studios nowadays is slightly different. They don't hire as many full-time game developer engineers anymore. A lot of them are contractors, which is just really shitty because these engineers are your bread and butter. They're the ones that bring home the bacon, and for some reason they're not treated properly like any other engineer in the ecosystem. Like it sucks. So hopefully with the growth of the open metaverse, that dynamic hopefully changes and game developers become more independent because there's more opportunity in the space.
We had a guest on the ArCast who created this platform called Pianity, which is an NFT site for musicians. It's a similar thing because there are so many musicians, and Spotify is like the popular sandbox that decides how much people get paid, yada yada. But something like Pianity allows the musicians to actually be paid more because people decide how much the music is worth. And so this idea of like liberating the platform from the legacy gatekeepers, it's something I'm really passionate about. And it's like really exciting to talk to someone who's doing something similar for the gaming sphere. And it's also crazy because gaming industry, you'd know this more than me, but like it's so profitable. I've read a statistic that they make like significantly more than movies do, the gross. Is that true?
Yeah, to a certain degree, yeah. Mainly because games, I personally, I think games should be significantly more profitable than movies. Mainly because you play a game, you spend hundreds of hours in it, but if you watch a movie, it's just you spend an hour and a half. You paid $15 for a movie.
Yeah,
but I think in like 2020, 2021, the gaming space was about I want to say about 140 billion dollar industry. The problem with that is majority of that revenue actually just goes to publishers. It doesn't even go to game developers as much. There is a few game developers that rise above the rest, but because they have extremely popular games, but those games don't really last very long. The revenue cycle of a typical game is that the most money they'll ever make is about 1 or 2 months after they've released the product, and then it trails off to zero over the next like half a year. And so even though a game developer makes mad bank the first month, they have that whatever revenue they make has to last them until their next game release, which it's never a guarantee that they're gonna release a new game after that. So the business model for game developers isn't actually that great, but they don't really have a choice because that's what the publishers have deemed their deal to be. But I hope that with the advent of the open metaverse, they have more control over whatever it is that they build, and they have more control over the economy that either they want to be part of, or the economy that they're actually building for themselves. And I think that because the open metaverse is a bit more sustainable, I think that even gamers, in addition to game developers, can make a little bit of revenue from, or at least earn something based off the time they spend in these games. Because right now, I want to say out of like the hundreds of millions of gamers out there, billions of gamers out there, I want to say only like 4,000 people actually make money playing video games, and that's an extremely small amount. So hopefully with our new ecosystem, it changes a little bit.
You mentioned earlier that one of the goals for Rawrshak is providing a standard for the implementation of assets, which will lead to scalability. And I was wondering if you could explain that to some of our listeners, like what an example of an asset is.
Essentially, an asset is any in-game item, or pretty much any in-game item that a player or a game developer deems has value. But the goal for the meta asset framework is to be able to give game developers the ability to deploy their asset once and have those assets be usable in any game that supports the framework. That essentially increases scalability because game developers don't have to go and manually deploy their assets to every digital world that they want to be a part of. And if a game developer has, let's say, 1,000 assets that they just created for one game, it's going to be difficult for them to go and redeploy that to, let's say, Decentraland, and then redeploy that to the sandbox, and then redeploy that to any world that they want their asset to be usable in.
Would it be like a hat, like a costume, or?
Yeah, it could be anything. It could be. So for us, we essentially created 4 basic types of assets for now. So there's text assets like titles, achievements, stuff like that, or lore, or even like in-game history. You can turn that into a text asset. There's also image assets, which could be guild emblems. That could be any texture, any image that you can reward your players with. Audio assets, something like a sound effect or a character line or a shout, even. And then the last asset that the last type of asset that we've created so far is a static asset. So in-game trophies or in-game decorations, where further down the line you can have these worlds where a gamer can come in and just essentially design their world based off of the decorations and the assets that they've collected over the last 5, 6, 7 years. But there are future assets that I haven't implemented yet, mainly because it's a little bit more complicated. A lot of technical requirements. A couple of them are like animation assets, like emotes or what are they called? Poses, for example, character skins, attachables like hats or guns or backpacks. There are many types of assets that can be turned into an NFT that can be distributed to the games and to gamers. But over time we will slowly flesh those out. We just started with the low hanging fruits of text, audio, images, and static objects.
Like in a year or two, if we were to do another podcast, you'd be telling me about all these assets that we haven't even thought of, right? As the gaming world is constantly changing and more people come into the sphere, and it's like this amazing amalgamation of creativity. What was the first game like that you fell in love with, like that you played and you were like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing art form?
Oh, there's so many over the course of years. For me, this is going to be kind of weird, mainly because like this was more of a game that was more popular in Southeast Asia at the time. Back when I was a kid, I played a lot of this game called Ragnarok Online. It was a popular MMORPG. I'm not sure if it was popular in North America, but I spent I want to say years playing that game. I had to pay a small amount of fee I would buy these prepaid cards that would give me time like in game to be able to play, like a couple hours here, a couple weeks here and there, and stuff like that. And that's how I fell in love with the MMORPG genre. And then I moved on to Dota. Oh God, Dota. and then shooters. I played a lot of Team Fortress 2. I really enjoyed, my favorite shooter of all time for sure is Titanfall. Oh, the movement in that game is absolutely ridiculous. And Mecha Titans, anyways.
And so like for example, so like Titanfall has such incredible graphics. So the scalability, I wonder, like, right, like it's a lot of processing and a lot of data. How has it been with the speed of things? Like, how has that been? Because we're talking about ArDrive, we're talking about ArWeave. Has the speed of being able to fetch the assets been able to keep up with the developers and gamers, or is it still too early to like try to port something like Titanfall-esque into this world?
For us, I think it's still relatively early. I haven't. So for example, the assets that that I've uploaded, for example, they range. For each asset ranges from, let's say, a couple kilobytes to 15, 20, 30, 100 megabytes per asset, depending on the complexity of an asset. I haven't spent the time to how do I describe it? To throttle ArWeave's download system, mainly because I don't have there's not enough assets in our testnet to be able to see what that maximum is. But I would imagine that as ArDrive improves over time, as more nodes come online, as well as more gateways come online, it becomes those download times and rebuilding of assets become much better over time. Again, it depends. It really depends on the complexity of an asset. Simple assets download just like that very, very quickly. More complicated ones, the ones that have a lot more triangles, a lot more the bigger meshes, or especially the ones with a lot more complicated textures. Those ones take a little bit of time to download, but apologies, I don't really have good numbers with regards to let's say with regards to, like, let's say 1,000 people download the asset at the same time. How many of those people are going to be able to? How many of those may fail, or how many of those may succeed? When it comes to decentralized ecosystem, I think it's or decentralized storage. I think it's still relatively early for projects like us to be able to say. I think that over time, as we flesh out a lot more of the ecosystem, we'll eventually hit these thresholds, and we'll work through them.
We will conquer all the barriers, and we will keep trying to find creative solutions, and whether it's like faster gateways or figuring out ways to access the data, because it's like everything is still relatively new and we're still figuring it all out. And before we started the interview, you were talking about how you use ArDrive and ArWeave, and I was just wondering if you didn't mind speaking for a minute about like how you use how you've been using ArWeave to help deploy the files and everything.
For our asset framework, we essentially require assets to be permanent, in a sense that there cannot be any rug pulls at any given time further down the line. Our goal is to make our assets, the meta asset, as permanent as it possibly can, and that's why we decided to work with on ArWeave, because the storage is actually permanent, and so all of the assets that will be deployed on Rawrshak will be hopefully will be sitting on ArWeave, as well as the metadata further down the line, and we decided to go with ArDrive because it has an amazing UI and intuitive interface that easily allows game developers and content creators to just upload the asset, get the necessary information, the necessary transaction IDs, and then link it to our NFT launcher, and everything just works lovely. Everything is just great. ArDrive and ArDrive has such a good UI that further down the line, maybe we fully integrate with ArDrive's ArDrive file system, that we can just directly upload assets to ArDrive. But we're still relatively early, and we need to spend a bit more time on developing the front end of our project. So we'll get there eventually.
Christian, I'm so glad you found ArDrive, and I'm so glad that we've been able to talk about all this exciting work you and your team are doing. And it's just fun because it's I love working in this space because it's just the potential of creativity and the human experiment of trying new things, and the excitement of permanence, the idea that generations to come, people will find this interview, for example. They'll find your assets. They'll want to know about Rawrshak and the history of the project in the early days. And my last question for you is, I wanted to ask about the name, because I was wondering if is it related to the idea that in psychology you see a Rorschach test and you kind of, it tells you something about yourself, what you see in it, or what's the origin of the name? Because I love the name.
When I started this project, I didn't really know what to call it. As I was watching this movie Watchmen, I was looking at Rorschach and the character Rorschach, and he's wearing this mask that changes depending on who he's fighting and who he's talking with. And I realized that the project that I'm creating, I wanted it to be as fluid and as personal to any game developer and any creator and any gamer that's using it. So the project itself is so flexible in that any game developer is free to use the platform in a way, however they want to go and use it. Creators can create whatever type of asset they want to create. Gamers can use the assets in any manner they see fit, in any game, in any meta world that they enter. I want them to be able to express themselves as they see fit, and that's where I got the name Rorschach.
Watchmen, the Alan Moore graphic novel, was so influential because it was the first example of these imperfect anti-heroes who were both heroes, but also problematic, like the comedian and like the fact that the old way of doing comics wasn't going to be sustainable into this postmodern world where like good and bad kind of had different connotations. And so in a poetic sense, in a philosophical sense, your project highlights how the old gaming world isn't sustainable in the ways you've talked about and how you're kind of liberating it in the way that that story liberated the graphic novel format. So I don't know if that's intentional, but I think it's a really poetic connection there.
Yeah, I actually never thought about it that way, but yeah, that's what I wanted to convey, in a sense that the system isn't perfect, and there are a lot of things to improve. And my goal is to just continue the development of the ecosystem, and hopefully make our the metaverse, the actual open metaverse, a lot more interesting and sustainable for everyone involved, and not just those in power. I
love that, and I'm so glad that you're using the ArDrive platform to do this, and I love that you've had time to talk to me, and I know you're a busy person. Anything we can do to help, we want to keep doing, because we want to, champion you on our platform. So thank you, Christian, for your really thoughtful answers, for your time. And where can the listeners go to learn more about the project? Where should we direct them?
You can essentially reach the project at Rawrshak.io, and follow us on Twitter on Rawrshak for more information, as well as announcements for our project. Our hope is that we try to build a very open and interesting metaverse for not only us, but also for everyone involved, all the stakeholders. We hope that the decentralized metaverse does actually catch on in a much bigger way than it already has, and it continues to grow, and we want to be part of that. Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate the time you've allocated for our project.
Christian, what a cool guy. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I'll be interviewing YT Cracker, who's a blockchain pioneer, a rapper I've worked with a lot over the years, a hacker, great guy. If you missed it, there's a new video about frequently asked questions that we posted on the ArDrive YouTube and Twitter, where we answer questions people have been asking. If you have questions about the technology, hit us up on Twitter at ArDrive app, or jump on the Discord. And be sure to check out the new NPR story on how Arweave is being used to store the history of the free press in Hong Kong as it's been censored. So I'm Andrew. We'll see you next week on the ArCast.